Round of applause. Well, tonight we're very excited. We usually are anyway, but this is episode number 401, and we have an incredible guest today. For those of you interested in sustainable cities, designing, developing, planning, building, tonight is going to be a show for you. Come and grab a seat. Mark Reed, good to see you, mate. So, my name is Robert Ian Bonnick. I'm the founder of RIB and Associates. And RIB, what we do is that we bring incredible people together to make profitable, dynamic projects here in Indonesia. Indonesian and foreigners coming together on both a national level and a local level, at the village level as well. So look, today I want to give, I've even got some notes because there's so much to say about this man. So our guest tonight, right, so sustainable city design, leading international expert, Dr. Giancarlo Mangone. Now, to say a few more words, he's a senior advisor in one of the most ambitious, livable industrial city development projects in the world. He's recognized as a leading expert in planning, designing, and implementing communities that are aspirationally livable, sustainable, and economically vibrant, yet attainable within practical budgets. He leads the strategic planning at the DLR Group, formerly led the planning and development of the United Arab Emirates core industrial region, and developed the United Nations Smart City and Resilient Planning Guidelines for the Asia-Pacific region. He developed globally leading research as a professor, with his research basically cited in over 300 scientific journals. We're halfway through. Global keynotes including the Canadian Museum of Nature, South Korea Ministry of Forestry, and the European Union's Circular Economy Commission at the 2020 World Expo. And tonight we've entitled Ecolivability Solutions to Tropical City Wicked Problems. Round of applause, everybody, for Dr. Giancarlo Mangone.
Thank you.
I feel like the interview's done already, you know what I mean? It's all done, it's all out there. Nothing more to say here, folks. So, look, maybe the first question is just to say, look, we've obviously spent for the last few days together, and you're an amazing human that I found out, and so many other things, but keeping it to the topic of tonight's Q&A, we're going to talk about, what is a sustainable city, because I have so many ideas on what that is, but I'm pretty sure most of them are completely incorrect.
Likely.
Right, thank you. And then, how can Bali, what suggestions would you have for Bali in this regard? And also from a global level, being that you've enacted, created, initiated, worked upon, liaised with, consulted on so many of these types of leading projects, if anyone here, either in the audience or those who are maybe watching in from wherever they are in the world, what are some of your pointers, right? Where do people normally go wrong? What can people do right? Yeah? And you mentioned before, what I really like is that it doesn't need to cost $1 billion, right? Yeah. You can do it for much, much less than I think that people have this idea that they can actually do it for, right? So maybe the first question after you say a few words you want to say would be, where did you get started in this whole kind of movement of becoming a designer when it comes to sustainable cities?
That's an interesting question. By the way, I hate having to eat the microphone, so apologies. This whole thing is just like a raging conflict for me. So apologies if you can't hear me sometimes.
Do it.
I don't want to. So I was a picky eater as a kid. So in terms of sustainable cities.
But by the way, it's been like this since the time that I met him. It's like playing tennis. There's a guy called Rain Rinaldi, who's a great guy from Jakarta, works for government and has many different businesses. And from the moment that he introduced us at Core Hub, Melissa Kirkman's been on the show. It was like this table tennis. When you meet someone, you just go backwards and forwards like this. So hopefully today you can understand us and we keep it civil.
And you can understand his pain for having to deal with me for several days. Yeah. So yeah, sustainable cities. I started as an architect, and what happened was during my PhD in the Netherlands, it was about how do we maximize impact, and I just realized like we can do as much as we want in an individual building, but it's not nearly enough, right? Like we have major problems. Like one building, you're kidding yourself. So yeah, it all started when I was doing my PhD that we had to go bigger and scale up, and then. And there's so many systems that need to be integrated. So social systems, economic systems, of course the natural systems. And so we started exploring that as a professor, which was really interesting because it was a different approach than most practitioners. So they get taught urban planning at school, they practition it in the traditional way in practice with different companies, but they don't actually see implementation. So most urban planners actually, they draw a bunch of nice pictures of what a city should be, and then they walk away. They just drop the mic and I'm done. I did a great job. This is going to be amazing. And then it never happens. It's like, 15 years later, it's like, whatever happened? And what's really interesting is a lot of them actually tend to be very, I know what I'm doing, and this was right. And they do sideload, like over there, 20 miles away is an arts district, and then way over there is a theater district, and that works. It's like, no, it doesn't. So this other approach was, as a professor, I was able to bring in other professors because they don't want money. They just want projects. And the students are really hungry for active research. They want to work on real projects. So we got to bring in psychologists, public health experts, environment ecologists, all the engineers, of course, and really go deep into issues. And what I did was work with cities like Rio de Janeiro, Cancun, Mexico, low-income communities. How do we develop their economies in a way that bring everybody up, raise affordability for local community, preserve or expand local natural ecosystems, and create a circular economy. So it's like trying to get at that integrated question. And the weird thing was I got a bit poached by a firm that will go unnamed to lead the master planning for one of the future sustainable cities in the world in the Middle East. And at the time, they were like, this is where you can get your ideas put into practice. And then I go into practice, and I'm like, wow, the common knowledge is 30, 40, 50 years behind, and they're not looking at these integrated systems because practitioners, if they never have that academic mindset, they're just always churning out projects. I'm churning out a competition right now and haven't slept in a couple days. It's due tomorrow. And it's we don't have time to fully flesh out ideas or go deep into these questions. Yeah. And so you need that. The reason why I'm taking so much time on this is because I think it's an important message to get across that it just can't be professionals. You hire a planner, you hire a contractor, a developer, and boom, Bob's your uncle and you have a solution. It really takes a deep approach with integration with academia and really deep thought and time to develop solutions that are effective.
So this integrated approach, right, seems to be central and pivotal in what you've just said. On a practical, pragmatic level, you mentioned already about the time challenge, right? You mentioned about, in certain projects, which won't be named, they seem to be decades behind in what they're actually trying to do. So what would you then say as a kind of, not a tip, but an insight? What is the most important thing about making integration work between disparate groups which are contributing to the same project?
Well, it's difficult because it's usually built into the contract. So the problem is you have commercial bidding, and everyone's trying to have the lowest bid. And then so even the integrated firms, some of which I was working for, they're marketed globally as an integrated firm, and then you're working inside and you're like, well, the water team just goes here, the city planning team goes here. I mean, I remember the director of water for this global company. Sorry, I'm afraid of it. Stay away. So the director of water for this, he called my, the planning partner for my firm and was like, why is your guy talking about water to the client? That's my field. Keep him away or kick him out. And it's like, what are you talking about? This, you have to combine livability. Everything's integrated. So unfortunately, it's just not in the water yet. And the way we develop contracts. And one of the problems is procurement. When we procure contracts, there's a technical evaluation. But basically, I've heard this from pretty much every municipality across the world. So the experts are brought in and paid to say, okay, these are the best. And one can be 5% more or 1% more costly than another firm, but 50% less good in technical abilities, and they'll hire them because when it gets to commercials, the procurement team will go, But they're cheaper. No, they passed the technical.
You know, I mean, how do you deal, you know, with, again, I've gotten to know you a bit, right? And people can see that he's very funny, right? Very quick, very sharp. But also, he cares, right? So he's a very passionate guy. So then, how do you deal with that? Because, you know, me putting words in your mouth now, maybe words you can't say, but I can, you know, so you're stepping aside these firms which are preaching this to the world, but internally you're doing the opposite. And you're a person who is driven by passion and driven by, well, I just wanted to make this thing work, right? I want to make this thing that I'm proud to put my name to. But it's not happening, right? So then how do you deal with that internally of you, and then how do you keep coming back for more?
Enjoy pain.
I didn't want to go there. He loves pain, everybody. Loves pain.
No, I mean, so one was going client side. Then I switched to basically being the city planning department for the biggest economic region in UAE, which was really interesting. And I didn't mention sustainability so that was to like the heads of the company that I was working for, which was also the heads of the nation. Again, no specific names, but convincing them to develop something more sustainable. I didn't use the word sustainability. It was just the status quo over there is to do villa-based development, which isn't unlike Bali or other tropical islands. There's this fetish, I would say, with low rise and not being taller than palm trees or whatever is more culturally relevant and creates more community, which is complete nonsense. It's actually the opposite. Because an example is Siargao in the Philippines. After the typhoon hit them, I went there, talked to the mayor of the largest city, worked with a nonprofit, got access to their master plan for the island, and because there was only a 4-story height limitation, the amount of people projected to move there and the economic growth that they were aspiring to would require the development or destruction of the natural environment for more land than the entire island. So you can say, oh, it creates more community. And it's like, really, how? Because if you have to teleport or drive for an hour to get to the public square or to the restaurant, Uluwatu, then how is that community? You're disconnected. So there's this irony, right? So that's one. But going back, so I didn't mention. I usually don't mention sustainability to my clients because the interesting thing is if you do it well, it's more profitable, creates more business development and opportunity, creates more jobs, and it's more livable. If you do it well, city planning. So, and it's also sustainable. So you can hit all of them if you know what you're doing. The problem is most people don't know what they're doing. It's very rare. So at that point, I said, you know, the planners came up with their designs. They were focusing on the villa scale. No, we're going to go more. And so I said, okay, do villas, fine. That's 1 to 2 story maximum. Do 4 stories, and then just do 10 stories. Average building height for a city of 250,000 people. Fine. Now, do the cost evaluation of that. So the 10 stories was 35% less costly to develop and to operate than the villas. So I just went to the leadership and said, do you want to save 35 billions of dollars, or do you want your villas? And by the way, this is more livable because we can have better centers, we can drive investment more because we have more value-add assets and public spaces and all these other things. Yeah.
You know, there's 3 things that come out of that. We'll do it one at a time. So the first thing is that, you know, you mentioned this word sustainability, right? So let's address it. Because honestly, when someone says to me now, right, a sustainable city, if I'm truly honest with myself, I don't really know what they're talking about, right? So just be straight up. So I would love to get your definition or impression. What is a sustainable city?
All right. So from a technocratic point of view, in my mind, it's very simple. And my firm, I'm working with them to create this metric. Because the interesting thing is there's no market-based way of measuring it right now in the marketplace. So ecological footprint, that's the term. So some people talk about net carbon neutral, water neutral, net zero, la, la, la. That's like trying to, you broke your arm and you put a Band-Aid on it and blood's gushing out. Like, it's not solving anything. It is, but it's not going to stop any of the major problems we have. So ecological footprint basically means the total impact, if we use cities, of the city on natural environments. Because, for example, we say, oh, in the US and in Europe, we've lowered our impact on the environment. No, we haven't. All of our manufacturing is done in Asia and Africa, and we ship all of our waste to Africa, and there's kids literally getting cancer and picking metals out of toxic landfills and that's our battery recycling clean infrastructure in the West, right? Like, so if you account for the entire value chains of our systems and the entire impacts, the West actually isn't doing so good. And there's a lot of work they need to be doing and a lot of industries they need to be changing. So ecological footprint, having an overall positive impact on natural environments. And that doesn't exist. We have not developed a city that has a positive ecological footprint.
It's amazing when you just let that sit, you know? Because again, all of the terminology out there, the people kind of using this word sustainability like it's, you know, water, kind of throwing it around. And then what you're saying, being a person who's a global leader in what you do, basically saying, well, there's nothing yet that has been done, which is actually this. That hits home. So what do we do about it? Like if someone maybe in government somewhere or someone who's a autocrat who basically makes all the decisions, doesn't need to involve anybody else. You know, if there's, obviously it's a lot more complex than this, but I like to reduce it to simplicity when possible. If there were 3 or 5 things that they could start to do as a process to develop a truly sustainable city, what would those 3 or 5 steps be?
That's a tough one off the you know, you're supposed to be nice to me. You promised. You promised.
It's true. I did promise him.
I only
got to get him on the seat, right?
This was supposed to be a softball game. You know, it's tough. I mean, look, there's a lot. Number one, the biggest obstacle to most cities' proper development is politics. So like when I was leading development, the amount of investors and very influential people in the local economy and community that have a direct, literally can come and say, we're going to cancel your project if you don't let us do this. Or we're going to stop your project because of this. Because in most cities, the local, where's the wealth? Well, a lot of the local real estate. And then who has the local real estate? Usually generational wealth. And then they're connected to the political. So it's a really integrated system. So when you start to do a master plan, one of the reasons why being a planner, drawing a pretty picture and walking away doesn't work is because there's so much political issues and challenges that you need to address. You need to bring these stakeholders in. So one is effective governance, and at the beginning of the project, bringing in the truly power player stakeholders, but also diverse stakeholders who really are impacted by your projects. And this is, by the way, not really done. We say it's called stakeholder mapping. So most planning firms say they do stakeholder mapping, and they just say, okay, the government is here, and here's the biggest business, and here's a community leader. Maybe there's a community leader, usually not. But you gotta go much deeper. And when you do, you actually start to unearth things like this place, ecosystems that are really driving business development and innovation and identifying opportunity and really the blood and the ethos of a place and the energy, which you don't get normally. So that's one. 2 is governance. So cities are just developed in silos. So each infrastructure, like water and waste and all of that, is managed by completely different teams. And so one of the things I did when I made the smart city guidelines for the United Nations for the Asian Pacific region was make sure we're assessing the overall impact of these systems. So it's not just like, okay, here's my water system and is it more efficient than it was last year? No. What's the overall GHG emissions of your water infrastructure? What's the overall cost? And not only that, compare it to a more compact city development model. So to get the overriding solution is compact livable cities. Okay. That's it. So if we get density, and there's bad density, there's a lot of bad densities out there. If we get livable density, and I do it by bringing in nature, which unlocks a lot of opportunities. So for example, what I've seen in Asia in a lot of places, Da Nang, Bali, for example, is so when I motorcycled through Da Nang, because that was fun, but I was doing it for work, right? Yeah. I saw the wider region. Da Nang markets itself as tourism, as a tourism hub, adventure tourism hub. Yet when I went to the rural areas, only an hour to 2 hour drive from the city, they were looking at me like, why are you here? Who are you? you're a stranger. And it was so much untouched, pristine nature that now I realize I shouldn't mention it here because people are going to go. Don't go. Leave it for me. I want to go back. But if you make rural communities, and by the way, this is a global problem. Rural communities tend to not have a good economy, and they lack infrastructure, healthcare, and technical infrastructure and all that. If you make them gateways to the nature around it, when I drove through those rural areas, I was driving through smoke, and I didn't really know what until I saw the farm fields, and it was because they were burnt, it's the annual burning, and you're breathing in all this nonsense, and they're deforesting all this nature because what they say is, okay, I can't access a job in the formal economy in the city, so I'm just going to go out to the rural area, I'm going to cut this down, and the police won't bother me, or I'll give them some money, and that's how I'm going to make my living. So they're disconnected from the system. But if you bring them in, if you actually had a tourism strategy for the region, and where you have rapid transit, and those rural communities become a gateway to the nature around it, where the nature itself becomes an asset. And this has been done in some refuges in Africa and in different nature reserves. When you make it an asset, then you stop destroying it because you're actually getting your economy from it.
You're making value, yeah.
And then you bring in infrastructure to those communities because that infrastructure investment isn't just for that community, it's for the urban citizens. Mm-hmm. So now you have millions of people and their taxes funding that infrastructure and supporting. So now within 15 minutes, you live downtown, you have all the great restaurants and nightlife and social spaces and coffee shops, and in Da Nang's case, the beach. But within 15 minutes, you can be in an untouched jungle. Now, how much more livable is that?
Love it. So again, what I'm kind of getting is this integrative, not only on the policy level, but also on the ground, right?
Yeah.
So how do we integrate these communities together in a way that, there's access between them. Yeah. And as you mentioned, you're leveraging it all because then you're saying nature has a value. Because it has a value, you don't want to destroy it, you want to maintain it. Got it. Brilliant. Okay.
Well, sorry, can I get one more point?
Yeah, please.
Right,
yeah.
Awesome. So one of the things too is natural ecosystems are over 50% of the GDP of every region across the world. In Asia, it's higher. It's 63% on average. So we're like going through Bali, almost everywhere is touched. It's being cut down, turned into rice terraces and all. Like I kept trying to, when I was driving to rice terraces that you suggested yesterday, I kept seeing a little bit of jungle thinking, okay, there's the nature. I'm going to go enjoy it for a bit and go for a walk. And it was just this little piece that, again, there was more rice terraces next to it. Like we've just destroyed so much of it, but it's to the point, we're not going to be able to extract resources from it in the future because we're going too far. There's physical limits to this. So it's not only about valuing nature, but it's about keeping our economy going in the long term because it's going to run out. And one example of that in places like Bali, frankly, is arguably past the tipping point. So look at I was going through Nusa Dua and walking through Canggu. I can't walk more than 5 minutes on the beach without having to make a choice of stepping my foot in toxic chemical sewage or turning around and ending my walk, right? And then everyone's swimming in that. So in Nusa Dua, you have all these top resorts from all over the world, and they're extracting value from Bali, right? So Bali has cultural value, it has natural value, it has social value. The people are so lovely here. Like Balinese are the nicest people I've ever met. It just, it broke my heart when I got here. I was just like, oh my God, you're so amazing. Why is everyone else not like this? And so that's all value that those hotels just get to take and profit off of, right? So, I mean, their strategy is, where are places in the world that people want to go to that I don't have to do any of that. The marketing's done. I just put in my hotel because there's some cheap land here. But what do they give back? They say they're sustainable because, okay, we don't wash our towels. Like we tell you to leave it on the floor, and actually that's just saving us money. It's not really about sustainability. But why aren't you, it's called land value capture. So they're doing land value capture. They're saying, we're going to take all this value from the islands, and we're going to profit from it. But why are the islands and the governments and the people not taking the profit from it and benefiting from this land value? So these hotels should be required to pay back into the infrastructure systems. They should be paying for wastewater treatment plants. There shouldn't, why is it okay? How can they say they're sustainable when their sewage, they're draining right into the beach, right? Which is their asset value. And so land value capture is done all over the world. Corporations do it, like I just described. The hotel industry does it. But to give you a positive example, Hong Kong Metropolitan Authority, MTR, to fund the development of their transit, Copenhagen copied this later and did a similar thing. They own the land. But before they announce what plot of land the next metro station is, they build it up as mixed-use real estate assets. And then they build that up, they lease it out, and then the lease rates skyrocket, and the sales rates skyrocket, and they profit from this. And that drives the further development of the rail system with no cost. So you talked about cheaper. I'm not talking about cheaper. I'm talking about actually, the money is there, and instead of using our tax dollars in the typical way, typical development is the government, the people, pay for the road infrastructure and the sewage infrastructure and the electric infrastructure, and yet the only one getting the profit from the land is the developers. So we're paying for their profits, and they're not giving back to us because they're giving us sprawling areas that aren't livable. They don't create social interaction, not sustainable, and they don't create economic development opportunity for us. So let's capture that, and that's a simple implementable measure that can happen. And that should be the default. Why is the default that the private developers get all the profits?
So as you can see, the last 3 or 4 days, we've been jamming like this, backwards and forwards, backwards and forwards, backwards and forwards. And look, so understand this. So your first time to Bali, right?
Second.
Second time. Remember, memory's going. But it's coming back, it's coming back. I can feel it coming back, coming back. So there are certain things there, that, again, for people that lived in Bali for a long time will know some of the stats. We'll know about the percentage land area that's been developed in Bali, and all the rest of that is quite low. But we're not going to touch any of that today, because I'm really interested to get your insights. Today is really important because I see quite a few stakeholders in the audience. So the third microphone we're going to activate pretty soon. What does that mean? It means that in the audience, you're going to get a chance to ask a question, right? And remember, with these mics, not like my great friend over here, hold it quite closest to your mouth. Speak into it that way, the sound will record beautifully, okay? So just think of what a question is. I know a few of you have got writing some stuff down already. So I'll get you to raise your hands in a couple of minutes, and then that way we'll get that microphone around to you. So look, we've spoken quite a few things, right? Land value capture, love the idea as I explained to you about how to leverage the value and where that value should go, and how it can then be used to do things like building these treatment plants and works and so on. And we've spoken about, this kind of maybe like a sort of 3-step guide to kind of how we can, if someone here is watching, this is how you can do it, right? And it's about, integrating, and I love the stakeholder mapping, right? I think that's a great word. I'm going to, if I had a pen, I'll be writing that one down right now. So stakeholder mapping I can see as being really, really important. Finding out who's who in the zoo and making sure you have those present at the table. And then, as you mentioned about the planning, right, having that integrated. So it's not a case of saying, I'm going to draw a pretty drawing, my work is done, here's my money, bye-bye. It's all about the implementation, right, how that can be done. And then when it comes to the grassroots. So I did explain to Giancarlo a few days ago about Tri Hita Karana here in Bali. Again, way to prosperity, way to happiness, these 3 roads of assessing, the impact of this development on human to God, culture, customs, traditions, on land, environment, regenerative systems, policies and practices, and human to human. So how can we create value for other human beings, right? So that will be interesting to get your view on, maybe not in this interview, but outside of it, because you've only just heard it. So look, what else would you say, right, if there's someone here who's maybe watching, I want to develop, I know what sustainability is now, great definition. I want to start to build a sustainable something, maybe not a city, right? I haven't got the funds for that. Maybe I want to start with my home. Start in the square that I live in, right? So you've given us one kind of blueprint for a sustainable city. What would be the start or the makings of a blueprint for making the area that you live today more sustainable?
No, that's a great question. I think at an individual level, housing isn't that big of an impact. Single-family housing. So one is living more dense, but you don't really have you can't drive developers' development as an individual. So of course, one thing would be developing that ecosystem of sustainability within your community. So whether that's, so in Bali, what if there was, so like I mentioned, like hotels are using some sort of branding to say they're sustainable. What if there was a Bali brand, which is basically a regulation, but it's a brand, which is saying, which actually dictates this is what our definition of sustainability is. So you can't dump your wastewater in the ocean and call yourself sustainable. So there's a Bali brand of sustainability, and they're held accountable for that. And as a community, you can start that, right? Like anyone could start that. And if you start to bring businesses together, say, hey, we're all going to sign up for the Bali brand. Because we did this in architecture. In architecture, as a profession, we said, it's called Architecture 2030. We said we're going to be, all buildings that we design are going to be carbon neutral by 2030. No one told us to do that. We wanted to do that, and we pushed the envelope. And this year, in COP28, was the first time that architecture and buildings were talked about at the COP. And there's actually, now they're talking about funding, and I mean, it's really becoming a recognized aspect, which is great. And so that's through community action. And throughout time, there's been these massive, you can read about, you can study it, there's been massive shifts. The massive shifts that happen in a social, cultural perspective tend to happen by very few people. There's these magnifiers that have a huge impact. So we shouldn't feel like we don't have the tools, right? There are, and like, to go back to your question about how do I keep going? Because when I get knocked down, when I try one door and I see, we can't make an impact on that, I'm like, let me try another way. And each time, when I see like certain organizations that claim to have, rate international sustainability and they don't really do what they do, okay, that doesn't really work. But that gives me a really interesting perspective on what are the opportunities, what are the challenges, and what are effective solutions. And so I think I would never, so I was talking to Ichi earlier about the creative process. So when I was an architect, I was going nuts because I noticed a pattern. Every project, there'd be a point where I wanted to just throw everything away. I thought it was a complete failure, garbage. What am I thinking? Just give up. And I eventually found out or observed that there was a pattern. That whenever I felt like it was terrible, a little bit later, I came up with this great solution. And it was something really cool and new. And I thought this was just a personal thing, so it gave me confidence to keep going. So whenever I got really sad, I would just be, hey, it's coming. It's coming, don't worry, just give it time. So go to the beach, do something fun, and get back to it. And then I observed 10 years later or something that in research they've observed this as the creative process. Yeah. So the point is just keep going. You just gotta keep going.
Creative process, love that. So before we go to questions, last one. So questions are coming. Think about the question. I'll give you plenty of time, right? Like, and by the way, right, when the mic comes, don't do this. Right? We see it every week where people like call it mic fright. If you got mic fright coming on, just tap the person next to you saying, "This is my question. If I get mic fright, please ask it for me." Right? This is the way through. So two quick ones, and then we go to it. So DLR Group, you're working with now. Tell us about them, what they're doing, what you enjoy about working with DLR. Yeah. And the other one is Wicked, the other one, which you're founder of.
Yeah, Wicked Solutions. Yeah. Cool. All right. So DLR Group, we're 1,500 people strong, employee-owned architecture, planning, interior design, the full integrated practice based out of Seattle, Washington in the US. But we're global. We have closest offices are Shanghai and Dubai. And I'm holding up the Asia Pacific office.
Come on. Hold it up.
And so yeah, why I'm really excited to work with them is because, like I mentioned, I worked for some other very global firms, and I'd say, why aren't we going to cities and telling them we can reduce their costs and municipal budgets by strategically densifying their cities or making them more resilient to natural disaster? So like, look at Maui, look at all these big natural disasters, the wildfires in California. It's because we sprawled. They're like, oh no, there's always wildfires, so much damage. How could this happen? It's like, it's been mapped for 50 years that was a wildfire zone. So what were you doing, right? And people don't recognize the connections to master planning. So what's interesting is this firm, other firms are like, no, we can't do that. It's just, we'd lose money. It would take time to sort that out. And this firm is like, let's do it. Let's figure out the way to do it. Partly because it's employee owned, but there's that drive and passion by people like, this is our company, so we're going to do, why not? We're going to do what we want with it, which is make as much good impact as possible. Yeah.
And Wicked.
Yeah, Wicked Solutions is my own brand. So that's what I've had since I left college, and that's when because I do I'm brought on all sorts of projects, so that's really doing the much more creative things and really deeper research and the design outputs, and that's working with strategic management consultancies, governments, architects, planners. Worked with Schmidt Hammer Lassen, one of the biggest Nordic architecture firms. William McDonough Consulting, which is claims to be the founder of circular economy, but started the cradle to cradle idea, and a number of what you mentioned, some other governments and cities.
Got it. Thank you. So, Sister Ayo, Brother Guzman, the third mic. Who's going to start us off? Mark Reed. Come on down, buddy. Come on, just over here, this way. Yeah. So we'll go to Mark first, and then after that, I'm sure Mark will get us started. I'm not looking at you, Carol. By the way, Carol's always got great questions.
Two. Check. 1, 2.
There you go, brother.
Hey, guys. So it was interesting listening to you, and obviously some of these projects that you're involved in and the stakeholders that you have to get involved and how you would possibly have to handle setting the tone for what you're trying to represent in any type of group discussion, trying to get people onto a project to think sustainable, to think what are we doing with our principles and how are they actually, I guess, flying in the face of progress. My question is, as a company or as a consultant yourself, what's the checklist? What's the template of things that need to be, I guess, involved in maybe your due diligence of a feasibility of a project and stakeholders?
So, I mean, the first point would be approaching the project from the client's objectives. So really understanding what is the client's vision, what are the main KPIs that they're looking for, and milestones and deliverables that they want. Because if you're not addressing those, it's like speaking to them. So if I go to them and say, "You're in the face of you're standing in the way of progress. Get out of the way and do what I tell you." Yeah, no one's gonna hire me. So it's more, okay, what are their key objectives? That's why I said I learned pretty early in my career not to mention the word sustainability, because it's just been taken over by so many, frankly, incompetent people that the common solutions and the solutions that are well known aren't effective and are very costly. I'll give you an example. Friedberg, Germany. It was seen as like the pinnacle of sustainable city planning and development across the world. They did green walls, green roofs, like anything on that checklist that you're asking me about, walkable, rapid public transit, all that stuff. But what happened is it jacked up the real estate value. And so all the middle and low income classes had to move to the suburbs. So then some smart person did a study and found that the carbon emissions from their commuting was much bigger than all of those sustainable renovations and investment that they did into the city. And so it shows you, if you don't address the core issues of that community, and there's always something about economic affordability, whether it's mentioned or not, well, not in every nation, but in most nations in the world is a key issue, and then social issues and livability, right?
That's a great point. Mark, I know you probably have a supplemental to that, but I really respect and appreciate everyone here that showed up, right? Because you can sit at home and watch this, which is great, but I always think that coming in person is better because then you get to meet the guests, but more importantly, you get to meet each other, because quite often the person that you kind of need or would be great for you to meet is sitting right next to you, but you don't say, right? So then it's a missed opportunity. So for the ones we just make up as we go along, because that's how we roll, tell Mark if you want to mention your company and what you're doing.
Oh, so just, yeah, okay. my name's Mark. I'm from Geonet Properties and Finance Group. We've got partners that are now undergoing $2 billion worth of acquisitions throughout 6 different countries, but mainly here in Bali. We're bringing in or refurbishing and repurposing some of these hotels. So it was interesting from my level to understand where possibly that might happen on, let's say, a 4-hectare site or on a 3-hectare site where we are taking over a hotel that was doing well and just needs 30, 40, maybe even $80 million to go in and position it perfectly for the next 50 years worth of business.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the great thing about those kind of projects is talk about 2 things. So the first thing I try to work with my clients on in that kind of scale is how do we have a bigger impact than the project itself, and just visioning that with you and talking it out and saying what can we do. So one thing is when you have that kind of those kind of projects and impact on the local community, you're a key stakeholder, right, in Bali, and so you can help push the needle. So because what blows my mind is it's like, okay, so the whole world is overheating. Only some people are profiting, yet we're going to let everybody die and the whole world collapse for those few people, right? So the vast majority, it's not in their best interest. And yet the governments who are voted, like these issues aren't being accounted for in the voting and all these other things. But what you can do, and the reason is because we're all disparate. We're all separated. And as you know, like small businesses make more jobs and grow the economy more than large corporations, right? Yet they tend to really lack support in every nation across the world. So again, through that branding, so I really think that branding is crucial because that allows for a lot of initiatives underneath that umbrella, let's say infrastructure, if you call it that. So you can say, all right, we stand for this, we want to have this kind of impact, and we represent this much assets of Bali. Who else is with us? And so that's how you can, if you're really passionate about it, I don't know if you are or not, you can really start leading the charge. Or even better, there's usually some really active, excited people in your community who don't have those kind of opportunities or education, but they're really passionate. Yeah. And there are social, there's different people in every group. There's magnifiers, people who can have a big impact. There's people who are connectors. They just love bringing people together, like this beautiful man here.
Mike Fright.
There's all these key players and just wonderful people and energy in every community that you can create opportunities for them. And they can help, bring these people together because they have the time. So that would be one, is thinking bigger. Then the other thing is, you hire us and we'll tell you how to make those 4 hectares the best that they can possibly be.
I knew that was coming. I knew that was coming, but you know what?
No, that's what we're here for, right? That's what we're here for.
That's what we're here for. It's all
I'm
good.
addressing you because you've got the blueprint. You know how to go and strategically set this mind frame up, right? And that can become a template for growth and for like you say, magnifiers and connectors and everything.
And I'll tell you, some of the best firms in the world, like there's a project where we're not even bidding on it. We were asked to just propose something for strategic implementation of, I don't know if I'm allowed to talk about it. So let's just say a major piece of infrastructure in the Middle East that was...
otherwise known as NEOM.
No, it's not. This is a much more practical project. So
NDAs, mate.
But on this one, there's all the big firms did a master plan, like I mentioned, and like pretty pictures and all that. But they didn't, for implementation, like $10 billion of assets. And they're like, just take this big region here, 200 square kilometers, and that's your first phase. And then here's your second phase, another $200 billion, 200 square kilometers. That's your second phase. Doesn't work, right? That's not practical. What are your key assets to implement? What are key support programs, economic, social, all that? And like I was saying, not many firms know how to do that because they don't have the experience. So the key is bringing also in firms that have that practical knowledge, but also that aspirational knowledge that combine the two. And I'd argue there's not many out there, if any, but we have it.
My guy.
All right. Good on you, mate. Who's next? We've got Sab first to your right, Mark, and then we'll come back to you too. All right. All good, darling. So just wait for the mic to get ready. Remember, if you want to say what you're doing, you can. Go.
Hi, Dr. Giancarlo. Nice to meet you. My name is Sappharo. And so I'm from Singapore, but I've been based here for 9 years, and my daughter's like Balinese. So I have a diverse background in public policy, real estate, and social impact, okay? So, but most recently, I am involved in the UN research island sustainability on the circular economies. I did a comparative analysis between Palau and Bali Island, and a lot of interesting findings. So I hope to implement this as well on island policy, especially for Bali. Now, so my career has been shaped by making commitment, making meaningful contributions to grassroots and society. And my question to you today is that given your extensive experience in creating, planning sustainable development, I'm interested to know if you have been involved in projects related to island sustainability and circular economy, because I've seen that you have written few studies on circular economy.
Yeah.
And can you share some of your experiences and insights, please?
Sure, that's a great question.
Thank you.
So circular economy, one, is when I was a professor, so all those projects were about how do we actually create a circular economy. Because circular economy has not been implemented anywhere in the world. No one actually knows how to build it.
Yes.
So I was with, this name will go unnamed, I was with the world famous leader in circular economy by a number of people, rated in the Times Magazine as one of the most influential people, blah, blah, blah. Really excited to work with him on a regional project, really big impact. So I was in charge of the circular economy master planning portion. So how do we make this region into a circular economy? We get in there, first meeting, and he goes, really excited to work with him. I'm like, this is great. And then he's like, so who do we know that actually knows how to implement a circular economy? These people knew nothing. And they're out there though, like, grandstanding and saying their impact, and they speak at Davos and all these things. And I even tried to, I'm like, if you're at Davos, tell them the biggest impact would be a global moratorium on sprawl development.
Right.
Do that and the world won't get destroyed. And, they're just like, ha, 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 and away they go. So that's one issue. But so one thing I do with Wicked Solutions, it's also my nonprofit arm. So it's like, I really want to have an impact. And so I really try to divide my time between billable projects, for-profit projects with clients, and really pushing the research and helping communities. And so, the Shargout project I mentioned, that was working with them on how to develop a circular economy, but also a resilient way to redevelop after the typhoon destruction. And a lot of that is using land value capture methods, which can be used to attract investors, which can be used, all those other ways of doing it, but doing it in a more holistic way is much more impactful. Yeah.
Thank you. My next question is that...
okay.
I'm sorry.
So just
this is the second interview.
So just with time.
Okay.
One follow-up is fine. That's Sab. Yeah. So just one follow-up questions. Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
So how different is it for private investment or multilateral investments? How easy is it? Do you think we can get investments from private investments in terms of circular economy? Because not many people are actually exposed or they recognize about circular economy policies. Only recently, the buzz of circular economy is going around.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So let's look at the smartphone. All the tech in a smartphone wasn't developed by Apple. Apple put it all together. They made it look pretty. But again, land value capture, let's just take out the land and just talk about value capture. The US government, through a very small arm in the Department of Defense, DARPA, right? They took some of the biggest CEOs and some of the biggest innovation industries and they drive this thing and say, what kind of projects and tech do we need to invest in to create the economy of the future? But oddly enough, so we're like, the world's going to destroy it and we're addressing that. So we're going to make all cars electric and we're going to mandate that. Okay, there's a lot of issues in terms of implementing that. There's a lot of challenges there, and it's arguable if it's impactful. But why are the governments not investing in creating a circular economy? Because all the products, are they regenerative? No. When we rate forests in terms of, we use the big companies of toilet paper, they say, it's all 100% recycled. No, it's not. They're cutting down the boreal forest, some of the biggest carbon sinks in the world in Canada, and probably in Russia. They're a bit more black box for obvious reasons. But in Canada, they're cutting down all the boreal forest, and it's releasing so much carbon and methane and causing melting of permafrost that's releasing bacteria that's been frozen for millions of years, and we don't really know what it is. And you know, talk about COVID. So we're unleashing a lot of risks. Yeah.
Thank you, Sab. Great question. So, brother, no, wait, here, just behind, and then to Carol after. Yeah. Okay, thank you. And then we'll go back that way. Otherwise, this side of the room gets happy. This side of the room, after they have a few words with me.
It's like a tennis match.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. A couple of things. I have got a question, but I want to frame it a little bit first.
Oh, you're that guy.
Yeah, I'm that guy.
Are we going to time him? Can we give him a limit, please, before it starts?
I'm really worried when someone comes that speaks and says that there's a definition, various definitions of sustainability. There's only one. For something to be sustainable, you can do it ad infinitum. That makes it sustainable. If it's not sustainable. Now, this is very clear. My background is I'm an engineer. I joined local government in Australia in 1990 and have been engaged in various levels of local government and state government in Australia. And through that process, in the early 2000s, got involved with ESD, if you remember ESD that no one talks about anymore. That was ecological sustainable development.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Why don't they talk about it anymore? Because, hey presto, it's not achievable. You cannot sustainably develop. You either develop and minimise impact, or you be sustainable. You can't do both. Sorry, you're kidding yourself if you think that is a true outcome. So please either start talking about minimising impact while developing, or doing something that's sustainable that you can do at infinitum.
It's a very engineering
I'm an engineer, sorry. That's the way we look at stuff.
There's a macro scale we should talk about.
In Australia and most Western economies, as far as I'm aware, local government all collect a thing called developer contributions. So a developer contribution is where the developer pays money. You mentioned that doesn't happen. It does happen. The biggest problem...
I was talking contextually.
Okay.
I'm not Australia.
Yeah, well, it happens all over the world. The biggest problem in that process is the authority, the local government.
So why is there no wastewater treatment plant here?
Sorry?
If there's enough development taxes being collected to fund the infrastructure in Bali, why do we have so much sewage going into the ocean?
Why?
Yeah, why?
Well, because money is being siphoned elsewhere, as everyone would know.
Yeah, so it's just... Yeah.
All right, keep on going. I know you're going to get to a great question. I know that.
Okay,
it's all good.
Yeah, it's coming. So the problem in local government is a thing called building nexus, is what's the cause and effect. Like I can build a new development, but I need to build a new community hall or whatever. In terms of reaching a system of sustainability, the thing you need to be looking for is it's pretty simple, really. And I came, and this is where the question comes about. One of my last project, a very large project I was involved in Australia, was a wetland rehabilitation project where multiple consultants had come up with multiple solutions that were essentially hard stand, concrete and earthworks. They'd collected about $50 or $60 million in developer contributions for the solution. My role was to review the project as it stood, and through my review I looked at it and said it actually only works for about 10% of storm events. So the issue was the wetland is essentially drowning, a thing called urban stream syndrome, which is a resultant of ongoing urban development, which essentially is the reduction of infiltration, blah, 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 blah. So I come up with a solution which was a nature-based solution. So basically replanting trees, revegetating big tracts of the upstream catchment. The problem, and this is the question for you, is that process of being able to build a pipe made from concrete, that's a capital acquisition in local government. Planting a tree, the tree is not seen as an asset. So that project, the Porters Creek Wetland Rehabilitation Project, that, which is one of the biggest freshwater wetlands on the east coast of Australia, that project halted simply from a financial perspective because the local government finance section said, hang on, that tree's firstly not an, we can't schedule it as an asset, and secondly, a bigger problem, when we plant that tree for $3 and in the next 10 years it grows and it's worth $30,000, that is a massive problem because we can't depreciate its value. And the whole of the fiscal, the whole fiscal accounting system of the entire local government, this is a huge community, the Central Coast on the New South Wales, all of it is reliant on being able to use depreciation to apply for government funding. So we're at a really, really bad position purely because of a financial situation. So my question to you is, what's the solution to that?
Yeah.
Because otherwise there's no nature-based solutions that are going to be implemented.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. There's a lot of those projects out there. So, for example, in Boston, they said, okay, for flood reduction, we can either knock down all these wetlands and do further development, or we can save $400 million in flooding management costs. So that was one successful project. Another one is in Washington, D.C. in terms of stormwater management, because first of all, as you know, green water infrastructure is much less costly in terms of stormwater systems than gray infrastructure or concrete pipe technical solutions, right? So it can be 30 to 50% more cost effective, documented in lots of scientific journals, so it's clear. The question is, how do we capture that? So in Washington, D.C., they did a green bond. It was the first green bond in the U.S. where they said, all right, so first I'm going to give them a comparison. So in buildings, something that's starting to really ramp up is called energy supply, ESOs. And so what these companies do is they say, don't give us any money. We're going to replace your mechanical system with a more efficient system. You don't have to pay us anything. You're just going to pay us the savings. We get to capture the savings of that more efficient system, so we profit from that. Go back to the wetland solution. So what they did with the green bond is say, well, you can either do a huge channel of concrete to dump that stormwater somewhere else, which creates more problems, or we can restore this wetland system over here, and it's going to be much less costly. And not only that, we're going to actually measure how much water infiltrates there during the peak. Now we're getting a bit technical, but during the peak rainfalls and all of this to really quantify the impact, and then we can leverage that to then implement it in a very technical way in many, many more projects. And so now this is being replicated across the country. So your case, like I won't get into like all their very specific financial methods. Yeah, it's a mess. And there are solutions then you work with the economic team to say, okay, how do we get in there? Because it's really trying, and again, it's managing those key stakeholders, seeing where there's points of flexibility, if there are any. It'd be a very long process to figure out how to solve that. But yeah, for the broader scheme of things, those solutions that I mentioned can really be impactful. Yeah, go for it. Sorry, there's a motorcycle. I haven't worked on those specific projects, but yeah, our company is working on getting into those projects right now. If you look at the Global Ecological Footprint Organization, they have some interesting work on that. And what you were talking, I was going to mention the net value capture. They have some interesting projects on that. Yeah.
Yeah, the two pieces of work that I found super interesting in pursuing this project, I had an uphill battle with my superiors in the council.
Of course. Yeah.
We finally got it approved and we got it all the way to essentially getting it implemented.
Yeah.
Except that's when we hit this financial hurdle.
Yeah.
In going through that process, I uncovered a couple of really amazing series of documents and policies. One is the Aarhus Convention, which you probably know about, and the other one is the EU Water Framework Directive.
Okay.
And both of those, if you Google them, the amount of amazingly good information.
Yeah. Yeah.
And of course the EU Water Framework Directive is very heavily involved in natural capital accounting. So.
Okay.
Thank you very much indeed for the question. And to everyone here, just to get to you, Carol, just thanks again for your questions, because it's like a collective energy that's created here every week. It's different every week. And, you know, that's why you have the questions, because it then helps us to direct what the collective wants to hear, right? So very important. Thanks for taking the time. Longest pre-frame I've ever heard, man. But it was good.
I've heard longer.
You heard longer?
I saw it coming. Rebecca.
No,
I called it. I called it.
Inside, I was in some kind of denial. No, mate, he's Aussie. You get to the point, mate. No, but awesome. Thank you. The abridged version. Love it. Thank you very much. And to everybody else here, Mark and everyone else who asked questions, Sab as well. Thank you very much. Carol, over to you.
Okay, so
poet,
I
right?
feel that there is a compounding of all that I've heard and what you've mentioned actually in the question that I wanted to ask you. So I lectured in tourism for 20 years. And one of the reasons I didn't lecture in sustainability but in responsibility was that sustainability for me is very single-dimensional in the way that it's very environmentally focused. And I think that being responsible involves the impacts on culture, the impacts on people, the economic impact, the political impact. So it's a much bigger way of seeing things. And it makes people accountable for their actions. Yeah. So here in Bali, there are a lot of small entrepreneurs, a lot of activists who really are trying to make the world a better place and are fighting like tooth and nail against rubbish and pollution. I actually refuse to clean the beach because I think that the worse it gets, the better it is when all the tourists are coming and nothing is collected and is full of trash and they all take pictures and put it on Instagram. Maybe the government is going to start to do something about it. So I refuse to give them a way to get out of their responsibility.
You're adding to the pile, aren't you? Admit it.
Yeah.
At night, you're just...
Yeah, I'm going. And we are sadly on an island where the planning really doesn't exist. It's very much a Western. Yeah. Everyone does whatever they want. Yes?
Developer-driven. Yeah.
Exactly. So, and it's incredible because it's a country that's immensely resourceful, intellectually. We've got apps that do virtually everything for us. And yet, we are incapable, as you mentioned, to have a systematic, well-organized system of collecting rubbish. So, what would you say, not to the little people that are all fighting and doing their things, but to those that have been elected or have responsibility at a much higher level, to convince them that they need to get their act together, because it's not only about cleanliness, it's about health. It's about duty of care to the people that live on this island and, you know, in any country. What would be your argument to convince them that they need to do something about it? Because there is no freaking reason why it shouldn't be in place right now, especially considering that it is an incredible tourism destination, #1 on Google search. Where is Bali?
Question.
It's an interesting question. I would bring it back to the stakeholder conversations we've had earlier. So vehicles are one of the biggest killers of people, both in terms of physical collisions and air pollution, right? It has major health impacts. Look at how long it took to regulate cigarettes. There's all these other things. So I would suggest Like you're saying it's common sense from a health point of view and this and that. There's a lot of things that are common sense with health systems globally that aren't being done, right? So I would suggest that's probably not the most effective means. And again, it was about, when you do stakeholder management, it's about knowing what their key objectives are. So it's going back and understanding who their key objectives are. And one of the other things about more in-depth stakeholder mapping that is immensely invaluable, that is very rarely done, is, and this is what I try to do with my clients, and when I'm successful in convincing them it's worthwhile, because they usually see this, oh, this is an add-on service, you're just trying to, no, this is really critical, is mapping all the stakeholders in a specific challenge in the region. And so what that does, and publishing that transparently. So Mumbai did this. Yes, in Mumbai they did this with a number of systems. A nonprofit did this, DARPAN. And what was really interesting is private developers, investors, entrepreneurs, techies, everyone then says, oh, if I want to deal with, for example, the trash situation, here's all the key players, here's where I could plug in. So here's who's producing the waste, here's who's managing the waste, all this, who's consuming it, all these things. And so by making visibility and transparency to systems, you enable people to take action. So that's one. The other is going back to what I was talking about before about a branding. Because one, if that brand, if like a Bali brand had value, and then you start to have power and a voice politically, and so then you can say, look, this is our brand, and this is what we're hearing, and these are the impacts, and this is how we can make it.
But for that as a system, you need to have.
I'm still waiting for the poetry. Nothing's rhymed
I can
yet.
send it to. I can send.
I haven't heard
I can
one
send
rhyme
you
this whole conversation.
loads of poems. For this to work, it's like any system of classification or labels. Labeling in the hotel industry is just a whitewashing, greenwashing, whitewashing, whatever you want to call it, thing. None of it works. It's packed with lies. It's packed with pretend. I'm pretending. I'm ticking the boxes, but actually, I'm not doing anything. And in order to have, when you implement a system, you need to be able to make people accountable. If the authorities are already not doing their job right now and are not showing leadership, whatever you create as brand, no one is going to actually check on it and make sure that
It's how you implement it. It's how you implement it, right? You're not going to ask the government to implement the brand. The community implements the brand. It's a co-op. So co-ops are successful the world over. In Sweden, I mean, there's all sorts of, so this branding, it's not, I didn't just create it. There's many case studies of successful regions who have grown tourism industries even from nothing by having a brand. So now every hotel, for example, uses local soap from the local community. So and that brand, there's a rating system that they created that everyone has to abide by, and they're the ones who evaluate it. So that's what I mean. It's a grassroots brand that you do it yourself.
Thank you, Carol. So we had a question over here last time I saw. Someone else? You want it, Mark? You got another one? Bhavna, okay. All right, so we have two more questions, okay? And then we'll continue this afterwards.
Offline.
Hi, my name is Bhavna.
Hello.
Hello. So I think this has been answered in some form through the different questions and what you've said. It's a bit of a two-parter, but I'll quickly frame it. So I'm not in the real estate industry. I'm not a developer, but what I am is someone who's been living here for 5 years, loves Bali, has a community of friends who include developers and builders and all of that. And my big thing is it's all about dialogue and amplifying voices so we can sort of create change. So my question would be, you mentioned earlier that when you look at places like Canggu, Nusa Dua, that Bali's kind of past the tipping point. So my question, the two-parter is, if you look at the island, the west side, which is ironic that we call it, the west side of the island, given everything that's happened, has obviously, as we know, been overrun tourist development, et cetera. Whereas the east side is still a bit more untouched. I fear that I say that out loud because it soon won't be. So my question would be, if you're looking at this west side of the island, is there one thing that we could do to course correct what's already happening and happened? And on the east side, what can be done preventatively, knowing what we've already experienced on the west side? just like one, and I know there's probably multiple layers to those questions, but if there's like one key takeaway for us now to course correct on the West and one thing we can do preventatively on the East.
I mean, it's a great question, and it deserves much more thought and much more analysis before being able to give a really effective answer, to be honest. But just because you put me on the spot, how dare you? What I would say is, one is it's very difficult once we build the infrastructure. So it usually is important. I mean, a critical thing is to solve these issues before they occur rather than after. Since we haven't, again, starting to capture value back for the community. So for example, Copenhagen, so I'll give you an example. They followed the Hong Kong model that I mentioned before, but they did it in a different way. They didn't actually know, a lot of municipalities don't even know what land they own. Because it's been over like so many years, and before there were things called computers, and there's a lot of vagary and there's a lot of gray in almost all systems in the world. So what they did is say, all right, let's fix this, because we could probably use that land. So they figured out where the land was. Then they copied the Hong Kong model, and so they funded their mass transit system by, again, using land value capture of that land, by using those lands for the hubs of the transit system. So for in the West, it would be thinking strategically, how do you capture value and some fees? And that's a very political question because everything already exists, right? Everyone's going to rebel. And then how do we then apply it? And of course, for me, it would be, so for Canggu, they have these rivers of sewage that flow into the ocean. Well, and when I look inland, you just see cranes and more development, and you hear, like, I thought I was having a peaceful lunch, and they just start ripping up the sidewalk next to me, and I'm eating concrete instead of my beautiful meal. So there's constant energy and activity here, but it's not being developed in a sustainable way. So shifting the development model, right? And again, and you can, because it's a river, and I did this, so a project I did with my students in Rio de Janeiro, demilitarized military base, over 800 square hectares. How do we fund the development of a park, or the transition of the military site into a park? And what we found was all the upstream locals that includes agriculture, and it includes some low-income communities, were dumping their waste into the river, just like here. So what we said was, all right, and that's polluting the bay of Rio de Janeiro. And the cool thing, the lemonade thing about this at the time was the Olympics were coming, and it was a visual thing. So what they did was they built a wastewater treatment plant along the river to clean all that up before it goes into a bay. Fine, costs a lot of money. So what we found was if we divert that water before it gets to a wastewater treatment plant onto the military site into a wetland, and we treat it, we're now funding the development of a park by reducing the treatment costs and operation costs and the energy demand of the wastewater treatment plant. So there's different, this isn't a solution it's just saying there are solutions. You just have to look at the systems and start to tease these things apart and what can happen. In the east side, again, compact, livable development. And pairing that with rapid, high-quality access to preserved and conserved nature. So having hubs of energy, I would call it Canggu semi-walkable. I've only been here a few days, so if I'm wrong, I'm wrong. And it's not my fault. But it's semi-walkable. And there's great choices of restaurants and all that, and there's a lot of interesting people here. There's a metro vibe to it, yeah? But it could be much better. You shouldn't have to ride your scooter everywhere, and I think you say every day you thank someone up there for living and not crashing, right? So I mean, it's quite, you put your life.
Not quite like that, but it's close. Like I'm saying, I thank Mother Bonnick because I have a near miss almost every day on my scooter. Just saying.
So yeah, creating those livable, walkable hubs where you really can access everything without having to get on a scooter. And you really constrain your development. But when I say livable, it's where it promotes social interactions and brings nature more in access to you. So right now, like I said, I was eating concrete instead of my lunch. What if I was looking at some birds, or there's a way to bring nature in that can be much better.
Okay, I think we're probably at time, unless it's very pressing. We're at time. You're thinking about it afterwards. So look, so I'm going to read something in a second just to kind of bring us back to where we are. But I want to give you some time, right? So think about what we've spoken about tonight. Think about the topic. Think about the title. Think about why we're here. And what I'd love you to do is to kind of sum up, not necessarily sum up, but if there's something else you wanted to add that perhaps you haven't mentioned yet, you're going to have maybe 2 or 3 minutes to have a think about what that is, and then after that we'll wrap up. But for those of you maybe just tuning in, or for those of you just joining us now here, it's a few things I want to say. So today we've been talking to Giancarlo Mangone, sustainable city design leading international expert. Doctor, I should say. I know it's Giancarlo, but it's Dr. Giancarlo. So now he is also a senior advisor to one of the most ambitious livable industrial city development projects in the world, recognized as a leading expert in planning, designing, and implementing communities that are aspirationally livable, sustainable, and economically vibrant, yet attainable within practical budgets. We spoke a lot about budgets tonight. Leads strategic planning for the DLR Group, global group, formerly led the planning and development of the United Arab Emirates core industrial region, and developed the United Nations Smart City Resilient Planning Guidelines for the Asia-Pacific region. He's also developed globally leading research as a professor, with his research cited in over 300 scientific journals. We're halfway through. Global keynotes including the Canadian Museum of Nature, South Korea Ministry of Forestry, and the European Union's Circular Economy Commission at the 2020 World Expo. So look, the things that I just want to kind of leave us with is for those of you maybe watching from overseas, Dr. Giancarlo obviously has kind of just arrived in Bali for the second time, as you said earlier on. And look, there are certain things that those people living here in Bali would understand, things like less than 10% developed, and there's many other things, right? But tonight wasn't about that. Tonight was about getting the heartfelt, immediate ideas from a learned fellow, from a guy who cares, a guy who's passionate, who's been around the globe doing what he does. And I think what we've managed to do is we've answered those questions, that we spoke about, which is, what sorts of ideas, practices would you like to see happen here? We've been through some of that. We've been into what is sustainability and been helped by my mate from Australia. Thanks, mate. You're a good man. Right? We've been through that. We've also been through some of the biggest challenges which are facing those who want to develop viable, sustainable cities, to whichever extent that is. We've also gone into, as a person that maybe is not going to develop a city, but how can I become a more sustainable human living on the planet? And we've got some answers there as well. We've heard from some great people here who form part of this incredible Bali ecosystem that we have, from the property sphere to the tourism sphere to, I love the engineering background over here, and obviously from USAB, who's working on the UN project at the moment, and obviously Bhavna, who is a concerned citizen who's been living here for 5 years. We haven't heard from you, Jen, Scale Climate Action, right? A wonderful group that's happening. Jana's just arrived. Oki Subajo, good day, brother. Oki, I always love to mention him. Bali Investment Club, Impact, early stage. They're at a pretty advanced stage and making incredible moves. So he's a great guy for you to meet. I'm glad he came. That's one person I would really suggest that you have a chat to. And there are many others here as well who are in this Bali ecosystem. So, coming to this part, I'd love to thank Tropical Nomad sitting in front of me, my brother Ichi, Guzman, where's Hadis, is over here somewhere, and Sister Ayu, thank you very much. This is episode number 401. Next week, 402, Christmas Day, we're still going to do it, right? It is about blockchain, actually, right? So, and we've got two guys, one coming in who created one of the most important and key foundations in blockchain in the whole of Indonesia. He's an amazing guy. And two Indonesian fellas. And then another one, Sabdo, who's been on the show before, who's been doing some incredible projects with government to herald, to help assist blockchain and its interaction with and, let's say, integration, great word, integration with Indonesia and how that works as well. And that will start a series about blockchain in Indonesia. There's people like Anta, Rahman, Bruno Calabretta, who've all been on the show doing some incredible projects in that sphere. So we're going to get into that next week. So maybe the longest outtake, but that's okay. So Giancarlo, mate, it's been Dr. Giancarlo Mangone. I know he's just as Giancarlo. It's been great to have you here, mate. Thanks for saying yes. It was a pretty quick turnaround. I think within 5 minutes of meeting you, I knew you were going to be on the show. You didn't know because I hadn't even asked you, but I knew already because we have a good energy together. But thanks again for giving us your heartfelt, passionate truth. And I love the way you speak, because you actually speak the truth, right? Which is not so hard to find these days. So much appreciated. Over to you to see us out. Anything you'd like to leave people with, whether it's a reiteration of what's been said already, or something that you would like to say that hasn't been said.
Well, first of all, thank you. This was very enjoyable. And having to talk to you, that wasn't so enjoyable. But that was
I knew
that was
that.
my penance.
We knew that. Okay, we deal with it.
But no, thanks a lot. It's really been exciting to see how much energy and knowledge and passion is here in Bali, and it's not everywhere. So the thought to leave with is there's a lot of expertise, again, passion and knowledge in very different fields, as we saw tonight with the questions. The French are never happy, so I'm not concerned that you weren't happy with my answer about branding. You still haven't made a rhyme, so I mean, but what I would leave with is I think there is a lot of potential for community action here, and it clearly extends beyond this room, because if there's this much here, there's more out there. So I think regional branding could be a big impact here. If the right stakeholders are here and have the interest, and it seems like they are, I'm going to talk and poke and see how much I can prod them after this. But really, thanks for listening, because I just really appreciate any opportunity to get the discussion out there, because I don't think the issues that are affecting our world are being discussed critically that much, and they're not being addressed seriously. And so it's really great to get pushback, and to just be able to get the word out and discuss it. And I hope you share it and make some sort of contribution in your personal lives, because the world is really, we have a number of crises. So what I wrote for the United Nations in there, every 4 years they have this Asian Pacific report. So I was in charge of leading the master planning guidelines and issues. And so I forget the exact final title of the report, but it's out there. It's about, this is the decade of crises. And it's actually the decade of tipping points. From a sustainability point of view, from an affordability point of view, from a livability point of view, people the world over are depressed, they can't afford to live, and the world itself is threatened to collapse in terms of human livability. And if we don't make major change this decade, we're in trouble. We're passing those tipping points. So I just appreciate if everyone can make some action towards making it better, and it's great to meet people who are really passionate about that, and it's really inspiring, and it's great to see the energy. So thank you so much for having me. Thank you.
Thank you.